The human body has limits. After 24 hours without sleep, cognitive function drops. After 48 hours, hallucinations begin. After 72 hours, the body shuts down. It is a biological law. But in May 1940, the German army broke that law. They drove their tanks through the Ardennes forest for 3 days and 3 nights, non-stop. They didn't sleep, they didn't eat. They felt no fear. The French defenders were terrified. They thought they were fighting supermen. But they weren't supermen. They were high. Every soldier carried a tube of Pervitin. Today we know it by a different name. Crystal meth. This is the story of the forbidden drug that fueled the Blitzkrieg and turned the master race into an army of junkies. To understand how an entire army became addicted to meth, we have to go back to 1936, the Berlin Olympics. The Nazis wanted to showcase Aryan superiority to the world, but there was a problem. The Americans were winning too many medals, and rumors began to circulate in the locker rooms. The Americans had a secret weapon, Benzedrine. Benzedrine was an amphetamine. It was legal, and it was powerful. It opened the airways and gave athletes a burst of focus and aggression. Watching from the sidelines was Dr. Fritz Hauschild, the chief chemist at Temmler-Werke, a pharmaceutical company in Berlin. He was humiliated by the American success. He decided that Germany needed something stronger, something better. Hauschild went back to his lab. He took the amphetamine molecule and modified it. He added a simple methyl group. It was a tiny chemical change, but the result was explosive. In 1937, he patented a new substance, N-methylamphetamine. It was faster than Benzedrine. It crossed the blood-brain barrier instantly. Temmler named it Pervitin. When Pervitin was released in 1938, it wasn't a forbidden drug. It was a sensation. You could buy it at any pharmacy in Berlin, no prescription needed. It was marketed as a cure-all for the modern age. Are you a housewife feeling sad? Take Pervitin. Are you a factory worker tired after a long shift? Take Pervitin. It became so popular that a confectionery company, Hildebrand, started selling pralines with Pervitin. They were nicknamed Hausfrauen Schokolade, housewife's chocolate. Each chocolate contained 14 milligrams of pure meth. They recommended eating 3 to 9 chocolates a day. Imagine that, your grandmother sitting with her tea, eating enough crystal meth to keep a raver awake for a week. Germany was buzzing. The entire nation was on a dopamine high. Confidence soared, depression vanished, and in a country preparing for war, this artificial energy was exactly what the regime wanted. But while civilians were enjoying their chocolates, the military was watching. Enter Professor Otto Ranke. Ranke was the director of the Research Institute of Defense Physiology. He was obsessed with one problem: fatigue. In war, the soldier who sleeps dies. Ranke saw Pervitin not as a party drug, but as a weapon. He ran tests on 90 university students. He kept them awake for days. He gave one group caffeine, another group placebo, and the third group Pervitin. The results were undeniable. The Pervitin group didn't just stay awake, they became aggressive. Their confidence was off the charts. They felt invincible. Ranke wrote to the High Command, "Pervitin is a chemically enforced military value." September 1939, the invasion of Poland. This was the first real-world test. The drivers of the armored columns were given Pervitin to keep driving through the night. It worked. The speed of the German advance took the Polish army by surprise. But the commanders noticed something else. The soldiers weren't just awake, they were ruthless. The drug stripped away empathy. It turned young boys into cold, efficient killers. The experiment was a success, and now Hitler turned his eyes to France. April 1940. The invasion of France was imminent. The German High Command issued the so-called stimulant decree. It was an order unlike any other in military history. Werke, the factory in Berlin, went into overdrive. They pressed pills day and night. Within weeks, they shipped 35 million tablets of Pervitin to the front lines. 35 million. This wasn't a medical supply. This was standard-issue ammunition. The instructions given to the medical officers were chillingly precise. Stimulant usage is recommended for breaking the enemy's resistance through sheer speed. The recommended dose, 1 pill during the day, 2 at night, and 1 or 2 more if necessary. The soldiers gave it a new nickname. They didn't call it medicine. They called it Panzerschokolade, tank chocolate, or simply Hermann Goering pills. May 10, 1940, the attack began. The German plan relied on one thing: speed. They had to push through the Ardennes forest, a dense mountainous region that the Allies believed was impenetrable for tanks. General Heinz Guderian, the mastermind of the Panzer divisions, knew that if they stopped to sleep, the French would reinforce the line. So he gave a simple order: I demand that you do not sleep for at least 3 days and 3 nights. Biologically, this order was a death sentence. No human can operate heavy machinery for 72 hours without rest, but chemically, it was easy. As night fell, thousands of soldiers reached into their pockets. Pop, swallow. Within 20 minutes, the Pervitin hit. The brain was flooded with dopamine and noradrenaline. Exhaustion vanished. The cold night air felt warm. The fear of death was replaced by a manic sense of purpose. The French commanders were operating on the rules of the last war. They assumed the Germans would stop at dusk. They were wrong. The Panzer divisions kept rolling, through the night, through the dawn, and through the next night. They appeared like phantoms. When French soldiers saw German tanks emerging from the mist after driving for 48 hours straight, they didn't just panic. They broke. They whispered that the Germans were demons. In a way, they were right. We have the letters. Soldiers wrote home describing the experience. Heinrich Böll, who would later win the Nobel Prize for Literature, was a soldier on the front. He wrote to his parents begging for more pills. Quote, "Dear parents, please send me some more Pervitin. It's the only way to fight the great emptiness." Another soldier wrote, "I feel no hunger, I feel no thirst, I am completely awake. The sun is rising and I feel like I could walk to Paris." Even the generals were using it. Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, was known for leading from the front, driving himself to the brink of collapse. The drug created a shared psychosis, an entire army operating on the same wavelength of artificial aggression. In just 6 weeks, France, a global superpower, surrendered. The world called it a military miracle, but nobody looked at the pupils of the victors. But there is a biological price for everything. Pervitin doesn't give you energy, it steals it. It borrows energy from your body's future reserves, and eventually, the debt collector comes knocking. As the campaign in France ended, the high wore off, and the crash was brutal. Entire units collapsed into a coma-like sleep that lasted for days. When they woke up, they weren't heroes, they were zombies. Soldiers reported severe depression, paranoia, heart palpitations. Some started shooting at imaginary enemies. Others died of heart failure in their early 20s. The master race was starting to shake, but the war was far from over. And now Hitler was looking east, towards Russia, where the cold and the drug would turn against them. June 1941. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. The German High Command thought Pervitin would work here too. They thought they could sprint to Moscow before the winter. They shipped millions more pills to the east. But Russia is not France. As the temperature dropped to -40 degrees, the drug revealed a horrifying side effect.
Methamphetamine causes vasoconstriction. It shrinks your blood vessels to pump blood to the heart and brain. In the freezing cold, this is a disaster. It restricts blood flow to the fingers and toes. Soldiers on Pervitin felt warm, a false sensation caused by the drug, while their limbs were literally freezing to death. Thousands suffered from severe frostbite and gangrene, accelerated by the very pills meant to keep them fighting. They were wide awake, watching their own toes turn black. And the crash was worse. In the endless Russian steppes, the short burst of energy was useless against a war of attrition. The soldiers became dependent. Without the pill, they couldn't function. With the pill, they were hallucinating. Reports reached Berlin of soldiers firing at snowflakes, believing they were enemy parachutes. The Blitzkrieg had stalled. The drug had failed. But back in Berlin, the most important addict of them all was just getting started. Adolf Hitler, the man who preached purity. By 1943, he was a physical wreck. Enter Dr. Theo Morell, the Führer's personal physician. The other Nazi leaders called him the Reich injection master. Morell kept extensive diaries. He referred to Hitler only as Patient A, and the list of drugs he administered to Patient A is shocking. It started with vitamins, then glucose, then Eucodal, a powerful opioid twice as strong as morphine, then cocaine eye drops, and of course, Pervitin. By 1944, Hitler was receiving daily injections of a cocktail that would kill a horse. He needed the drugs to maintain his delusional optimism, to shout at his generals, to believe he was still winning. Look closely at the footage from 1945. Hitler stands outside the bunker, greeting child soldiers. Look at his left hand. It is shaking violently. He tries to hide it behind his back. Historians used to say this was Parkinson's disease, but modern toxicology suggests something else. Those are the tremors of a junkie going through withdrawal. As the Allied bombs destroyed the pharmaceutical factories, the supply of Pervitin and Eucodal ran dry. The Führer wasn't just losing the war, he was going cold turkey.
By April 1945, the Third Reich was nothing but rubble and ash. But even in the final days, Pervitin was still being issued, not to conquer, but to delay the inevitable. Boy soldiers from the Hitler Youth were given the pills to banish their fear of the Soviet tanks. Old men were given the pills to keep them standing in the trenches. It was a macabre end. A nation that dreamed of a 1,000-year Reich spent its final hours high on meth, terrified to close its eyes. You might think that after the horrors of the war, Pervitin was banned immediately. You would be wrong. The Nazis were gone, but the drug remained. The Temmler factory in West Berlin continued to produce Pervitin for the West German Army, the Bundeswehr, and for civilians until the 1970s. It was even included in the survival kits of German pilots for decades. It wasn't until the 1980s that it was finally removed from military supplies. The addiction created in 1938
took half a century to break. And Germany wasn't alone. War is a mirror. When the British and Americans discovered Pervitin in shot-down German planes, they didn't destroy it. They copied the idea. The Allies had their own version, Benzedrine. British pilots used it during the Battle of Britain. American GIs used it in the Pacific. World War II wasn't just a war of tanks and bombs, it was a war of stimulants, a chemical race to see who could destroy their bodies faster in the name of victory. The story of Pervitin is a warning. The Nazis tried to engineer a superior human being, a master race that needed no sleep, felt no fear, and showed no weakness. But biology cannot be cheated. They didn't create supermen. They created a chemical loan that could never be repaid. The Blitzkrieg was a military marvel, yes, but it was fueled by a drug that hollowed out the souls of the men who fought it. They marched into history wide awake, but they left their humanity behind in a pill bottle. This is WW2 Story, where we expose the veins of history. If this story kept you awake, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments, is there any difference between a soldier and a machine? See you in the next briefing.